So those of you listening in class who remember anything about my stories from my personal life, know I'm probably the last person to talk about any of this, but here we go. So we're looking at Romeo and Juliet because we're looking at a unit on themes, classical themes in literature, and I introduced it through this lens of anthropology and sociology, which means the stories that we tell and why we tell them, what they have to do with our lives. We're looking at this question: what happens when we choose love and passion over all, meaning over everything else? So this title of this presentation is Rules of Love, Getting Unmanned and Badly Behaved in Romeo and Juliet. Hopefully by now you've watched that balcony scene, listened to my other video, where we got to see these two young lovers just at the height of their love, taking the height of risk in order to just be together. Let's take a little bit more look at this story before we start to get ready for our assessment. Okay, so here's a term you don't hear anyone say anymore. It's a classic term that goes back. Unmanned. It's a verb. It's something that can happen if a man chooses, generally speaking, if a man chooses romance over violence, or let's use other synonyms for that, say over honor, over fighting, over friends, over, over the call to act, in a violent way. Then we've got this term you used to hear more in the time of Romeo and Juliet, even medieval times, unmanned. So a man can be unmanned, deprived of the qualities traditionally associated with men, such as self-control or courage. Self-control and courage. So what we're looking at is when we talk about romance and we talk about sociology and society, the stories we tell give messages about how we are supposed to treat these things in our lives. So let's talk about this in Romeo and Juliet, what it means to get unmanned. A little background, we talk about sociology, and I'm plugging all this because so many of you are so ready for college already, and sociology is a great major. Author Pagan Orenstein has a great quote on boys' use of the homophobic epithets, such as FAG. So what she talks about, when we talk about getting unmanned in a modern context, because no one says that anymore, like, you've been unmanned, sir. But you can think of words, fill in the blank, and there's all sorts of languages, like, man, you are really acting like a right now. Probably in your head, you got about few words that come to mind that mean basically this. Boys use that word in now referring to homophobic epithets, like words that describe homosexuality. So terms for a gay person, a lot with each other. I say this at school all the time. But they would say to me, this is boys who Dr. Orange interviewed, straight boys talking, is that they would never say this to a gay person, that they had gay friends, that they weren't homophobic, but they used that word all the time. And it had become basically a slur on masculinity. That's important. Not so much a statement of sexual orientation, but I think that word, that slur for gay, is what kind of draws the lines of the man box for boys. So this is an important line because what we're looking at is the man box. In Romeo and Juliet, Romeo is going to step out of the man box in the society of England in the time of Shakespeare. Story takes place in Italy. In modern times, if guys, and this is not just for our straight males here, this can apply to anyone in any type of relationship because we all have to struggle with these expectations. But if we're talking about specifically our males, although I've had some female students that embody a lot of this too, if they step out of that tough box, I mean, if they step out of that tough role, they can get knocked back into place. So here's a great line. I got this from a book called Hip Hop Generation, from the song. There's a whole chapter about it. I thug them, love them, and leave them. And it turns out that most young men, in fact, feel cut off from their hearts. This is Ornstein's word. Because we sort of force men to stay in the box. We looked at a song earlier this year. Common talked about young men having to push in the feelings, and older men are more able to feel love because you spend so much of your young life trying to make sure that you're ready to roll, always trying to advertise that you're ready to fight, that you are not someone who chooses romance, even though, it's appealing, this idea of this lover Romeo. And girls can enforce this too. It's not just guys enforcing it on guys, it's girls enforcing it on girls and their expectation of guys. So let's get back to Romeo and Juliet. If you find any of this fascinating, I could talk about this forever, but I want to save you from having a long lecture. Look into sociology studies, culture studies, feminist studies, masculinity studies. It's all there. This is what we all exist inside. So getting back to what we got here. So this image on the left is a nice reproduction of Shakespeare, probably more costumed to what they might look like in the times. And you can see, of course, fighting. And now this was a 90s rendition of Romeo and Juliet that was done. There's actor Leo DiCaprio, for those of you who saw Titanic, looking a little Bieberish before Bieber was probably even barely born. But what they've done here, what the director did with this version is he had them carry guns instead of swords, even though the story technically takes place in Italy back many centuries ago. This is a way to kind of reproduce what the story might look like in a modern context. So what these guys were in their time, we can connect with a little bit easier. It was a 90s telling, and I'll show some clips of that movie. And again, just a little background. Remember, this is, in its time, this is a gang orientation. You're representing a family. You are supposed to protect the honor of that family at all costs. If someone insults or has words, you need to be ready to back that up. That's why they're holding the guns. That's why they're all together. All the choice of costuming and actor and all that, that's all just the director and costume team for the movie. So again, so we got Juliet in the Capulets, Montagues for Romeo, Capulets for Juliet, and of course it's red and blue. That, you know, it's got to be that way. That goes back. If there's ever some sort of conflict, usually these colors are somehow involved. So in the movie that we saw the picture from above, here's how they portray sort of the Capulet side of the reality in the 90s rendition of the movie. In another movie that shows it more to its time, here's little Juliet. Coming from her side of the family, her side of the family is bound to the same situation. They're supposed to always defend the honor. They're supposed to protect each other, and they do not like each other. The only reason they're not even killing each other is because the head authority, the government of the city of Verona, the prince, tells them if either one of them breaks the peace, they're in huge trouble. So if Romeo is kind of stuck in his masculinity box, meaning he has to be ready to be violent all the time, Juliet is caught in sort of the traditional feminine side of that, which means she is supposed to just marry who she's supposed to. She's supposed to be obedient. Romeo is supposed to be tough. Even in the story, he's one of the main warriors. The boys respect him. He's a fighter. Juliet's supposed to be obedient. It's a great scene. You can see the acting really well done. Juliet has already sort of gone off on her own. You can tell because mom is looking disappointed as the nurse that, you know, has known her since a baby. You can tell she's looking concerned, but trying to say, like, you can imagine her saying, like, oh, you know, are you sure you need to do this? Because Juliet is being disobedient. She's supposed to marry someone that her family set her up with. And if she does, everything will work out. She doesn't. She's in love with Romeo. And this little side character, Tybalt, important thing about him is that he's real tough, and it makes sense that she has this situation in her family. She needs to be obedient. Tybalt is in charge of trying to basically kill Romeo if he steps out of line. So in the context of a gang war in Italy in sort of Renaissance era, oh gosh, I hope I didn't get that wrong. Maybe it's pre-Renaissance. Yeah, anyways, let's go with it. You can kind of see the background they're working in. So a little bit about the feminine side of this when we talk about sociology. So Romeo has to stay a warrior and bad things can happen if he chooses romance over all this. For women, it's usually about choosing romance over obedience. So if you remember, go back real fast, the slide here is what happens if a man chooses romance over violence. He can be considered unmanned, and then we got all these slurs. For what happens if a woman chooses romance over obedience to her father, to her family? We got a whole bunch of language. This is the English class, so we love language. So we got a whole bunch of words culturally, and I didn't even include any of the worst ones, that have to do with insulting women or demeaning them if they step out of line, especially in issues of sexuality. So here's some of the classics. And these are not even the worst ones, but then we've got some that are a little more middle of the road, emotional, hysterical. Then we have having to do with authority, insubordinate, disruptive, rebellious. all these words that have to do with if a woman's responsibility is to be obedient, if a man's responsibility is to keep honor and be violent, what happens if we choose love? If you enjoy the themes I'm talking about in regards specifically to women, I Am Not Your Perfect Mexican Daughter, shout out to those of you in class who I know read this year, really explores those themes. Okay, so for sake of our study, we're going to look at the opening scene. I'll post it from a couple renditions of Romeo and Juliet, a couple films that have been done. We'll look at the balcony scene. I hope you already watched that. That's where they are at the height of their love and danger for one another. And then we'll look at the death of Mercutio, an important scene for our study as follows. So we're going to look at the evolution of Romeo in this concept of him getting unmanned. Romeo the shooter, you know, when he's still rolling tough, Romeo the lover, which we looked at, and that's what he's known for famously in history. And then Romeo, quote unquote, unmanned. Is he now a coward, a traitor, any words that have to do with what happens when you've chosen romance and you are not showing up to the fight like you are supposed to show up. So all that said, you might be wondering, how does it end? Well, I'll leave that somewhat open. If you want to do the honors option of the assessment, I'll post next week. You can find out because I'll give you a way to watch the whole thing. But I can promise you, like I said with my first lecture on this, it's not going to be a Disney ending. This is more of a recent cultural invention that if you take a risk, if you disobey your parents, if you do whatever it takes to follow love, then everything will work out. That is a more recent idea. This play, Romeo and Juliet, comes before it and doesn't make the same promises that we like to live inside today. Okay, everyone, I will post some opening scenes. Contact me if you have questions.